You get your paycheck. You're smart. You've got a degree. You read. You understand compound interest and tax brackets and all the rational things you're supposed to understand. And yet somehow, by the middle of the month, you're wondering where it all went. Again. And it's not like you're reckless. You're not gambling it away. You're not buying yachts. You're just living, making reasonable choices, treating yourself a little. And somehow the money disappears faster than it should. Faster than the math says it should. And you feel this weird shame about it. Because you're supposed to be smart. You're supposed to have this figured out. Other people who seem less intelligent than you somehow have savings, have investments, have their finances in order. And you're sitting there at 2 a.m. looking at your bank balance thinking, what am I doing wrong? I think there's this assumption we all carry that intelligence equals good decisions. That if you're smart enough to understand something, you're smart enough to act on it. But money doesn't work that way. Money is weird. It operates on a different level than logic. And the smarter you are, sometimes the worse you are with it. There was a spiritual teacher, Osho, who talked about this in a way that's uncomfortable but true. He said the mind is not your friend. That thinking, analyzing, being clever, these things don't lead to wisdom. They lead to more thinking, more analysis, more cleverness. And when it comes to money, that's exactly the problem. Smart people overthink money. They see too many options, too many possibilities, too many what-ifs, and they paralyze themselves. Or they convince themselves that the irrational thing they want to do is actually rational if you just frame it right. And then they do it, and then they regret it, and then they analyze why they regret it. And the cycle continues. There's this joke about a philosopher who falls into a well, and people gather around trying to figure out how to get him out. And the philosopher from the bottom of the well starts explaining the physics of falling, the metaphysics of depth, the epistemology of rescue. And someone finally yells down, "Do you want help or do you want to keep talking?" And the philosopher says, "I'm not sure those are mutually exclusive concepts." That's smart people with money. They're at the bottom of the well explaining why they're there instead of just climbing out. I see this in myself. I'll research a purchase for hours, read reviews, compare prices, build spreadsheets, and then I'll buy the thing I wanted in the first place. The research didn't change anything. It just gave me permission. It just made me feel like I was being rational, when really, I was just being elaborate about being irrational. Or worse, I'll research so much I get paralyzed. I'll see all the options, all the downsides, all the opportunity costs, and I'll do nothing. And doing nothing feels safe, feels smart, but it's not. It's just fear, dressed up as prudence. Osho used to say that the mind is a beautiful servant but a terrible master. And with money, most people let their minds be the master. They think their way into bad decisions. They rationalize their way into debt. They convince themselves that this purchase is an investment, that this expense is necessary, that they deserve this. And the mind is very good at convincing. That's what it does. It makes stories, it creates justifications, it finds reasons. And the smarter you are, the better your mind is at this. The more sophisticated your rationalizations, the more convincing your justifications. You can talk yourself into anything, and you do, constantly. There's this phenomenon where really intelligent people make terrible financial decisions and then explain them beautifully. They'll tell you exactly why it made sense at the time, why the logic was sound, why anyone in their position would have done the same thing, and they're not lying. They genuinely believed it. Their mind genuinely sold them on it. But their gut knew better. Their gut was saying, no, don't do this. This is a mistake. But the mind was louder. The mind was more articulate. The mind had arguments and data and projections. And the gut just had a feeling. And we've been trained not to trust feelings, to trust logic, to trust the mind. And that's where smart people go wrong with money. They trust their minds too much. They think their way into poverty while feeling very rational about it. I know someone really intelligent person who spends hours analyzing investment opportunities, reads all the books, follows all the trends, understands the market better than most professionals, and consistently loses money. Not because the analysis is wrong, but because the analysis is paralyzing. By the time they've thought through everything, the opportunity has passed, or they've talked themselves out of it, or they've found some obscure risk that probably won't happen but might, and they do nothing, or they do the wrong thing at the wrong time because they've overthought it. And then there's people who barely understand finance, who just follow simple rules. Save this percentage. Don't spend more than you make. Invest in boring things. And they do fine. Better than fine. They build wealth slowly and steadily because they're not smart enough to talk themselves out of the basics. Osho would laugh at this. He'd say, of course. Of course the simple people do better because they're not carrying the burden of their own intelligence. They're not trying to outsmart the game, they're just playing it. And sometimes playing it simply is the only way to win. But smart people can't do simple. Simple feels beneath them. Simple feels like they're not using their intelligence. So they complicate things. They optimize. They look for edges. They try to beat the system. And the system beats them. Because the system doesn't care how smart you are. The system just cares what you do. And what smart people often do is nothing. Or they do too much. They're either paralyzed by options or scattered across too many options. They can't just pick something and commit. They need to research more, consider more, analyze more, and by the time they're ready to act, the moment has passed. There's this parable about a donkey standing between two equally appealing piles of hay, and the donkey, being perfectly rational, can't decide which pile to eat from. They're exactly the same distance away, exactly the same size, exactly the same quality. So the donkey stands there analyzing, trying to make the optimal choice, and starves to death between the two piles. That's smart people with money, starving between two equally good options because they can't just pick one. And it's not just about investing or saving, it's about spending too. Smart people are terrible at spending money on themselves. They feel guilty, they overthink it, they wonder if they really need it, if it's the best use of funds, if they should save instead, if they should invest instead, if they should wait for a better deal. And they end up either never buying anything and living like monks while sitting on money they never use, or they snap and buy everything at once in a kind of retail panic. No balance, no ease, just constant internal negotiation, constant second-guessing, constant analysis. And here's the thing Osho understood that most people miss. The mind creates problems, so it has something to solve. That's its job. That's what it loves. It loves problems, it loves complexity, it loves having things to think about. And if there aren't real problems, it creates them. So with money, your mind will create financial anxiety even when there's no real reason for it, even when you're doing fine, even when you're ahead. Because the mind needs something to worry about, something to analyze, something to fix. And if you let it, it will turn your entire financial life into a problem that needs solving. A puzzle that needs perfecting, a system that needs optimizing. And you'll spend all your mental energy on that. Thinking about money, worrying about money, planning around money, and you'll never actually enjoy it. You'll never actually use it for what it's supposed to be used for, which is living, which is freedom, which is doing things that matter to you. Smart people turn money into an intellectual exercise and then wonder why it doesn't bring them peace, why it doesn't bring them happiness, why having more doesn't feel like enough, because they're thinking about it wrong. They're approaching it from the mind instead of from something deeper, something simpler, something that doesn't need spreadsheets and projections and 5-year plans. I'm not saying don't think about money. I'm not saying be reckless. I'm saying notice when the thinking becomes the problem. Notice when the analysis is just anxiety in disguise. Notice when you're making things complicated because complicated feels smart and simple feels dumb. Because the truth is, money is simple. Spend less than you make, save some, invest some, use some to make your life better. That's it. That's the whole thing. Everything else is just the mind creating complexity so it has something to do. But smart people can't accept that. They need it to be harder. They need it to be more sophisticated. They need to feel like they're using their intelligence. And so they make it complicated. And then they struggle with the complications they created. And Osho would say, that's not intelligence. That's just the mind playing games with itself. Real intelligence would be seeing through the games, seeing that simple works, that less thinking often leads to better results, that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is stop being so smart. But we can't do that. We're addicted to our own thinking. We're addicted to feeling clever. We're addicted to the complexity because it makes us feel important, like we're doing something significant, like we're playing the game at a higher level, but we're not. We're just making it harder than it needs to be. And paying for it, literally, with money we don't have because we thought our way into spending it, or with opportunities we missed because we thought our way out of taking them. And at 2 a.m., looking at the bank balance, we know this. We feel it. We see that all our intelligence didn't help, maybe even hurt. But by morning we'll be back to thinking again, back to analyzing, back to being smart about money in ways that make us dumb with money. And maybe that's just how it is. Maybe smart people are doomed to overthink money, to complicate it, to turn it into a problem that can't be solved because the problem is the solving itself. And maybe seeing that doesn't change anything. Maybe you still overthink. Maybe you still make the same mistakes. Maybe intelligence really is a curse when it comes to money, but at least you see it. At least you stop blaming yourself for not being smart enough. At least you see that maybe the problem isn't that you're not smart enough. Maybe the problem is that you're too smart, too clever, too good at convincing yourself. And Osho would probably just smile at that. That knowing smile, and say yes. Exactly, your mind is destroying you and calling it wisdom, and you'll keep letting it because you don't know any other way, because thinking is all you know. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's just the truth. Uncomfortable, unresolved, but true.